unit. So I want to start off by giving you guys kind of an overview of the nervous system and what it does. The nervous system monitors both our internal environment and our external environment. It's kind of like the watchkeeper, if you want to think of it that way. But we also have another system that monitors, and that's the endocrine system. So, we're not going to waste energy on two duplicate systems doing the exact same thing. So the difference is how they do them. The nervous system provides very swift, so very fast acting and very brief responses to the stimuli that we get from the environment. So any change in our surroundings is what we call a stimulus, or the plural of that is stimuli. Now, the nervous system includes both voluntary, so things that we can control, like turning your head, writing with your pencil, as well as involuntary responses, like churning your stomach, opening the valve between your stomach and your small intestine. If we had to control consciously all of the different things that happened, we'd never fall asleep, because we'd have to think, okay, we've got to make our heart beat. We've got to be able to breathe in and out at the same time. It just wouldn't happen. The majority of our responses are actually involuntary, and you'll see that when we go through the system. Because of this, all of this monitoring and the amount of involuntary stuff that happens, and I've told you guys this is the most complex organ system that we will study this semester. Now, we can actually take the nervous system and break it down in terms of function as well as structures. And we're going to start by looking in terms of the structures, how we can divide it. So there's two major divisions of the nervous system. The first one, based on structure, is the central nervous system. I'm going to abbreviate that CNS throughout, just because writing out central nervous system, you guys would get mad at me. The central nervous system only includes two structures, but this includes 99% of our neural tissue in our body. That is the brain and the spinal cord. Now, this area is responsible for processing, in other words, figuring out what we need to do with the incoming information that we're receiving. It also transmits the motor commands that we use in response to this incoming information. And the central nervous system contains the areas that include the higher functions of our intelligence, our memory, as well as our emotional centers within us as humans. So there's a lot going on within the central nervous system. Now, the other 1% of the nervous system is contained in another area called the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. If you think of peripheral, you guys have probably heard that with your vision, the vision that's out to your sides. And that's literally kind of, when you think of central nervous system, if you think of the brain and the spinal cord, it's kind of down the center of your body. The peripheral nervous system are those nerves that come off of the central nervous system and go to the sides of the body. Like if you hold your arms out to the side, they're the nerves that go all the way out down to your little itty bitty pinky finger so you can wiggle it. Stop wiggling. All right, so this is all of the neural tissue that is outside of the central nervous system. Even though it's so little of the neural tissue, it is much more complex, just because we've got such a wide variety of different things that we can find here. A lot of the actual tissue within the central nervous system looks very much the same. And that's a lot of the secrets that we're still trying to unlock in terms of how they work with the nervous system. But the peripheral nervous system, things look a lot different. A pressure sensor looks a lot different than a touch receptor or a temperature sensor. So it is a very, very complex system. Now, we can take this peripheral nervous system and divide it down into two major parts. We have the afferent, or the sensory division, and that is just what it sounds like. Okay, this is part of our senses. This is what allows us to detect changes in our environment. So what happens here is we take the information from our environment through the sensory division and transmit it to the central nervous system. So the receptors that actually capture this information are called sensory receptors. And it creates what we call a sensory pathway. So it goes from a sensory receptor, into the central nervous system for processing. These sensory pathways monitor our internal and external environment. So we can monitor what's going on outside of us, if it's light out, if it's hot out, if it's cold out. But we can also sense things inside of us. I'm hungry. I have a pain in my leg. I pulled a muscle maybe. Okay, those are all senses. Now, this information travels up the spinal cord. Okay, so that's important because direction is important. This is taking information from the outside up to the brain for processing. All right, what this does, sorry about that, is create information going up to the brain, but most of it actually gets filtered out. We don't pay attention to every single little thing going on because we can't. It's impossible for us to monitor that and still keep our body functioning. So what we do is we actually have a filtering system at the base of our brain that actually filters out a lot of that information that's coming in. It creates, like for instance, feeling the clothes that we wear. We don't, once we put them on in the morning, we usually don't feel them unless there's something that's irritating us. Or background noises. You climb in a car, you hear the car start up, but once you're driving down the road, you don't really hear the sound of the engine going. You filter a lot of that out of your sense of consciousness. Now, the other branch of the peripheral nervous system, is the efferent, or the motor division. And it kind of works in the opposite way. It takes commands from the central nervous system to the effector. Now, what an effector is a place where that change is going to occur. So, we get the information through a sensory pathway, our brain and spinal cord kind of process that, and then it sends a command out to the effector. What are we going to do? If I put my hand on a hot stove, the effector is going to be the muscle to pull my hand off of that, or if I step on a pin or something like that. So the effector is wherever that change is going to occur. Is it a muscle contraction to cause movement? Is it a gland, like an endocrine gland that needs to release a hormone, for instance? Potentially, it just depends. Now, the efferent division has some subdivisions within it as well that we're going to go through. And we're going to kind of pull this all together on a concept map when we're done with this. The first division of the efferent nervous system is the somatic. Now, soma, S-O-M-A, means body. So this is the one that's in the body. Okay? Its effector is going to be skeletal muscle. So this is under our voluntary control. So when we're turning our heads, or we're writing, or we're walking, we are using the efferent division, specifically the somatic nervous system. But this somatic nervous system really only controls a very small fraction of our activities. The much larger one in the efferent division is the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. Here the effectors are going to be either smooth or cardiac muscle, as well as our glands. This is completely involuntary. We have no control over it. Now, these adjustments, though, just because we don't control them, doesn't mean they're not important. In fact, they're actually more important. They are more important than our SNS adjustments, because things like our heartbeat, our breathing rate, our digestive system, changes that we have there, all of those are what help maintain homeostasis without us even thinking about it. Now again, the autonomic nervous system can get broken down again into two major subdivisions. Now this is going to be the ending, I promise. Okay. The first subdivision is the sympathetic. What the sympathetic does is it helps to mobilize our body during very extreme situations. So it creates what we call the fight or flight response. So it's increasing, if you want to think of it, increasing our level of activity. It's going to stimulate things like hormone release, our level of alertness, as well as preparing our body for emergencies. Now, these effects of the sympathetic nervous system do tend to linger. So, once you kind of get that jolt, it immediately go away. It takes a little bit of time because a lot of these things are actually controlled by hormones whose effects are much longer lasting than the nerve impulse themselves. So, our sympathetic nervous system will stimulate the hormone release of, let's say, epinephrine or adrenaline. That kind of gets our fight or flight response going. But you guys know, somebody scares you, you have that kick in, and it takes a while for your heart rate to come down and your breathing to come down and that kind of jittery feeling to go away if they've really, really scared you. So it does take a little bit of time. The other one is the parasympathetic division, and we refer to this one as the rest and digest. These are meant to conserve energy. So what it's trying to do, if the sympathetic is kind of amping us up, the parasympathetic is trying to cool us down a little bit and have us chill out for a while. It's going to do things like decreasing our metabolism. It's also going to increase things like digestion or things that we can take care of while we are sedentary or sitting down or not moving around a lot. These, though, do tend to be much briefer. Okay, think about digestion. We're not digesting all the time. It's not a long-lasting process. And the effects are very specific to the organs or the sites that we're talking about. So this one is a little bit harder to generalize, but the whole idea is that these two work in opposites of each other. Sympathetic elevates activity, parasympathetic brings down that level of activity. Again, we have to have this opposite pairing because if we amp up the level of something and can't bring it back down, we can't maintain homeostasis. And remember, that's the big picture. So like I said, the parasympathetic and sympathetic work in opposition to each other. And so most of the organs that we have nerves that belong to both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. When we have an area that has both sets of nerves, we refer to that as dual innervation. So it has the capability of both increasing its activity as well as decreasing its activity. It's kind of like a negative feedback in terms of activity, and that's the whole idea. Again, homeostasis maintenance. Now, these pathways have a disease that you guys have probably heard of, and I want to take a couple minutes here to talk about that. That disease is cerebral palsy or cerebral palsy. Depends on how you want to pronounce it. This is a general name. Okay, so kind of an umbrella name. There's a lot of different specific types of CP, but all of these disorders affect our motor pathways. So it's affecting the commands that are coming down from the brain to the effectors. Now, there's a couple of ways that a person can get cerebral palsy. Number one is a premature or a stressful birth. What happens during premature birth, a lot of times the baby's lungs are not developed properly, and so they will actually get a decrease in the oxygen levels. During a stressful birth, let's say that the umbilical cord gets wrapped around somebody's neck, you can actually get the oxygen supply cut off for a period of time. When that oxygen supply level gets cut off to the brain, it actually damages those pathways, the central nervous system. Okay, so what happens is that actually can cause the damage to those motor pathways. Prenatal drug exposure. Now, I'm not just talking about things that are like narcotics that we think of, like street drugs, marijuana, cocaine, that sort of thing. Those are definitely problems, meth. It's also prescription drugs that can cause a problem. So, and unfortunately, a lot of times, women don't realize they're pregnant and they're still on certain medications like antidepressants and other things that will affect the development of the central nervous system while the fetus is developing. Usually by the time they have figured out that they are pregnant, a lot of those things have already been created within the fetus, so they're already damaged. So that's why kind of if you're on medications, kind of knowing and being prepared for getting pregnant is kind of important. The other one is a genetic defect. And so both of these, obviously if you've got the bad genes, you get a bad pathway development. So both of these last two actually damage the pathways. So they actually physically damage them and they're not repairable. Sometimes with the oxygen levels with the premature stressful birth, you can actually get some recovery of function, just depending on that. Okay, so those are that's kind of the overview of our pathways. Now, in your notes, and it should be actually on the next page after neurons. I just needed to take up a whole page here. You guys have a diagram that kind of looks like this. Now mine's in color, I know, and but you can see it's divided into 3 levels. You've got the dark purple at the top, you've got the yellow that's in the middle, and then you've got these lighter shaded boxes down below. Okay. Now, we're going to start with the one here on the lower left. Those 2 boxes represent receptors. And receptors can come in the form of somatic sensors, so within your body, like muscle tissue or skin, or visceral sensors, ones that are embedded within your organs. These guys actually collect the information, the stimuli from the environment, and they feed it up through the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, through the afferent division, into the central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord. So basically these arrows represent how information is actually traveling. So it's going to go from the sensors through the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system up to the central nervous system. In the central nervous system, it's going to undergo information processing. So we're going to get some stuff filtered out. We're going to have some stuff that we're actually going to pay attention to. And our nervous system is going to make a judgment. Do I need to deal with this? How do I need to deal with this? What are we going to do? Type of thing. Once it's processed that information, it is going to send out a signal saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. And that gets sent out through the efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. Now, depending on what needs to happen, it can go down one of 2 branches. It can go down through the somatic nervous system, the SNS, which is going to be the effector of skeletal muscle. Okay, so if it's something that we actually have to do to physically move using skeletal muscle, it'll go through the somatic nervous system. If it's something that needs to happen that we have no voluntary control over, then it's going to go through the autonomic nervous system. And in that case, it's either going to increase the activity of something or decrease the activity of something. So depending on which it's doing, it's either going to be in the parasympathetic or the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. But in either case, that signal is going to travel to things like smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or our glands. So the 3 different types of muscle and the glands are referred to as the effectors. All right, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to jump to the next chapter just so this one isn't too long. We are going to start today on our neurons and probably fill in a diagram here. Okay, so I will be right back.